Okay, we have several questions on the chat, but they are
Yeah.
more dealing with the relationship between this book and the other books that you wrote
Okay.
recently, like the Universe of Things. So I think
Yeah.
it's better that we go through the questions we sent you in advance and come
Okay.
back to the question with the other books. Yeah.
예,
Okay.
잘 쉬셨죠? 예, 이제 지금부터 우리 참가자분들하고 질의응답 시간을 갖겠는데요. 저희가 미리 앞서서 질문을 먼저 받아 놓은 게 있습니다. 예, 우리 참가자분들께서 좋은 질문들을 많이 해주셨는데 그거를 먼저 직접 해주시는 게 좋을 것 같긴 한데 제가 추병권 선생님 혹시 지금 자리에 계십니까? 아니면 지금 안 계신가요? 예, 그러면 이미 이제 우리 번역자님께서 통역자님께서 이거를 통역을 해 주셔서 질문을 해 주셨으니까 어떻게 제가
질문을
대신
근데
예,
언급을 해야 될 것 같아요. 질문이
직접 해 주시면 좋겠는데 제가 대신하면 아무래도 부족하니까 혹시 추병건 선생님 오셨나요?
어, 안
그러면
계시면
다른
일단
분으로
한글로라도 네, 여기
예,
적혀 있는 거라도
예,
질문을 드린 게 들레즈
예.
미학에서 영감 그리고 화이트헤드의 미학이란 샤비로의 미학이론 동시대는 그러니까 지금의 시대는 미학의 시대인가 이거입니다. So the first question that Mr. Byung-gon Chu raised is, what do you think were the important inspirations for Deleuze's aesthetics, and what is Whitesian aesthetics in your book?
Yeah.
And tell us more about the central idea of your theory of aesthetics. And do you see the contemporary era as an era of aesthetics? These were the questions that we've sent.
Okay. That's those are excellent questions, and they aren't all easy to answer. But start with, I think both thinkers, Whitehead and Deleuze, are very much people of their time and influenced by their own backgrounds. So for Deleuze, I think a major impetus, though he's a philosopher, is French modernist experimentation in the arts, in literature and other arts in the 20th century before him. If you think of many of the people he made, Antonin Artaud, the playwright and poet, who he mentions frequently in his books. He also mentions some other French experimenters like Maurice Blanchot. Going back a little earlier, he wrote a lot about Marcel Proust. So I think he has a canon of French modernists. When he talks about music, for instance, he mentions French modernist composers of his time and before time. So I mean, he'll talk about Debussy, he will talk about Olivier Messiaen, he'll talk about Pierre Boulez and people like that. So there's always a question of how you relate, the works that somebody likes to their overall aesthetics. I think Deleuze never quite writes a book which is about aesthetics in the classical way, but he talks about sense and sensation and things like that. He has a book called Logique du Sens, Logic of Sense or Meaning, and then he has a book called Logique de la Sensation, Logic of Sensation, which is about the Irish contemporary of his time, Irish painter Francis Bacon. So I think Deleuze is looking at modernism, French and more widely Euro-American modernism, and trying to put it in connection with his philosophical ideas, which are coming out of philosophical tradition and Bergson, and also his own inventions, but which try to deal with the way in which classical versions of order get disrupted in the 20th century.
Okay.
Yeah,
I will translate that first. Answer for the first question first. So, 아주 좋은 질문들이고, 이 네 가지 질문이 다 쉽게 답하기 쉽지 않은 질문들입니다. 들레즈의 미학적 영감이 무엇이었는지에 대한 답은 들레즈는 프랑스 모더니스트들, 그러니까 프랑스 20세기의 근대 예술가들에게서 많은 영감을 얻은 것 같습니다. 극작가이고 시인이었던 아르토, 그리고 작가였던 모리스 블랑쇼, 마르셀 프루스트 등을 그의 들레즈의 글에서 언급하고 있고, 이렇게 일종의 그 프랑스의 그 캐논이라고 할 수 있는 그 중심 예술 작품들이라고 할 수 있는 다른 예술가들을 참고하고 있기도 합니다. 데부시를 비롯한 여러 프랑스 작곡가들을 참고하고 있습니다. 하지만 한 사상가가 좋아하고 즐겼던 예술 작품과 그의 미학, 예술 철학을 관련 짓는 일은 쉽지는 않습니다. 거기에는 몇 가지 고려해야 될 사항들이 있습니다. 고전적 의미에서 미학, 그러니까 전통적인 의미에서 예술 철학에 대한 책을 들레즈가 따로 쓰지는 않았습니다. 하지만 감각에 대해서 감각의 논리학이라든지 아니면 그 아이리시 작가였던 프란시스 베이컨 화가였던 프란시스 베이컨의 그림을 다룬 글들이 있습니다. 어쨌든 요약하자면 들레즈는 그 프랑스 모더니즘을 자신의 철학적 아이디어 어떻게 질서가 파괴되는지 그리고 베르그송이나 시각 과 관련된 그런 아이디어를 연결 지으려고 한 것으로 보입니다. Okay, now into your second
Okay.
question. Yeah.
Whitehead.
Yeah.
Okay. Whitehead, interestingly, doesn't talk. He talks about when he talks about art. He mostly talks about 19th century art. He doesn't seem to have that much of a connection to the modernism in art of his own time. With the one exception I mentioned, he became friends with Gertrude Stein, the experimental American writer who lived most of her life in Paris. And what he had in common with her was that they had both went back to the philosopher William James, who was Whitehead's favorite philosopher and who Stein had studied with. But there's no sense I get that Whitehead knew much about Stein's own experimentation as a modernist writer. He is interested in aesthetics in general because he talks about things like feeling. I mean, he sometimes makes up words. Other times he uses very common words, but does them in a kind of weird kind of way, like reinvents them in a strange way. So he talks about feeling, and he says that's a common word, but I have a very specific meaning for it, which is not necessarily the common meaning, which is basically how any entity at any moment is affected by what it senses and experiences. So Whitehead's entire philosophy seems centered on aesthetics, even though he doesn't always talk about aesthetics in the conventional Western philosophical way, because he's always talking about how what anyone is at any moment, or any entity is at a moment, and an entity is not, as I said, it's not so much continuation over time, it's that you reinvent yourself every moment, but that at every moment you have all these impressions coming into you from the moments before, and you take those and do something with them. You might get rid of some which you don't like, or you might take them up and try to revise them. You might just affirm them and repeat them. And this is both the way that I, at any moment, like right now, am inheriting from what I was 15 seconds ago or 30 seconds ago, but it's also how I'm inheriting from all the things around me which attract my attention, or sometimes which affect me without my noticing. And so that kind of aesthetic model is sort of not just about works of art, but it's central to the way he understands entities in the world as functioning. And his claim, I mean, obviously this is most relevant to human beings, but his claim it's not only animals and other living things, but even inanimate things, in a certain sense, in their very limited ways, are taking up what came before. I mean, if an object standing somewhere is blown over by a strong wind, they're responding to the impression that the wind hit them with. And so in that sense, aesthetic, all of his understanding of the world is sort of focused on aesthetics. And that's what I was trying to say in my talk, that where for Kant and for traditional 18th, 19th century Western philosophy, aesthetics is sort of like a supplemental or secondary realm, Whitehead sort of takes it and puts it as the beginning of everything else. So all these other things come from aesthetics rather than aesthetics being somewhere in the distance apart from them. That's the best I could say about that.
네, 화이트헤드의 경우에는 주로 예술에 대해서 말할 때 19세기 작가들을 말하거나 긴 하는데, 당시 그 동시대의 모더니즘에 대해서는 거의 말을 안 하고, 그리고 거르트루트 스타인과의 그 관계가 있긴 하지만, 그 전통적인 그 예술가로서 거르트루트 스타인이 어떤 작업을 했는지, 거기에 대해서는 크게 또 언급을 하지 않는 것 같습니다. 대신에 화이트헤드에게서 미학이란 예술에 국한되기보단 좀 더 다른 특정한 의미가 있는데, 그것은 저희 책에서 정동이라고 번역된 어펙트, 그리고 우리가 어떻게 외부 대상으로부터 영향을 받는지, 또 감정을 얻게 되는지, 또 영향을 주고받는지, 이런 것에 더 관점을 둡니다. 그러니까 모든 순간, 모든 경험은 그 앞 순간, 바로 이전에 존재했던 순간을 따라오는데, 우리가 그 어떤 한 순간에 처해 있을 때, 그 앞에 30초 전, 60초 전, 우리가 알지도 못한 채, 그것이 어떻게 우리에게 영향을 주는지, 그리고 어떻게 우리가 바뀌는지, 그 세계에 존재하는 모든 것들이 어떻게 그런 식으로, 음, 영향을 받게 되는지. 그래서 그러니까 인간을 비롯해서 동물뿐만이 아니라 나무와 같은 무생물에 대해서도 이런 방식으로 바라보는데, 바람이 불어서 나뭇가지가 흔들리면 그 나뭇가지가 어떤 방향의 그 정동, 어펙트, 영향을 받았다, 이런 식으로 보기도 합니다. 그러니까 미학의 초점이 좀 다르다고 할 수 있고, 그리고 이게 오늘의 강의를 통해서도 말하고자 했던 바인데, 칸트에서는 거긴 잘 못 들었는데, let me I go back to your comments on Kant. So
Yeah.
the aesthetics took a supplementary role in Kant and the other philosophers before Kant.
Yeah.
It was
Or
it
after.
was
I'd say
okay.
after.
After. 오케이. 그러니까 칸트 이전이든 이후든 미학은 대부분의 철학가들에게서 부수적인 역할만 했었는데, 화이트헤드는 이런 식으로 그 부수적인 역할보다는 조금 더 근본적인 역할, 그러니까 세계를 마주하는, 그러니까 굳이 말하자면 인식이나 윤리보다 더 근본적인 역할을 부여하려고 했다는데 더 특징이 있다라고 보시면 그걸 강의에서 전달하려고 했다고 합니다. 네. Okay, now we can go to the third question. Yeah.
Tell us
Your
more.
Yeah.
Honest. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I have an aesthetic theory really, in that I don't think of myself as a philosopher, and part of that is because I don't think of things in as systematic a way as I think philosophers do. I'm more of a cultural critic or something like that, because I just take works, both written texts, but also movies and videos and other things when I can understand them, and I try to think about what they're doing and what they're saying, but also what they're making, what they're doing, what emotions, what are they making us feel, how are they reflecting aspects of the world we might not think about otherwise. So, I mean, in a way, that's all aesthetics, precisely because it's not systematic, and because I'm thinking about sort of mostly about how culture works, but also other entities. I mean, in one of my books, I wrote about science fiction novels, but I also wrote about slime molds, which are these very strange organisms. And I just have an article coming out soon about plants and about how the way in which plants think. And, increasingly scientists seem to be suggesting that not all living things think in a certain way and feel in a certain way. And it seems bizarre at first glance to apply that to plants rather than to animals, but I think there's more and more evidence that they do. But with this all, I mean, it is aesthetic in the sense that it's all about how we respond to the world and transform things as we respond to them. I mean, again, if you go back to Kant, Kant uses aesthetics twice. He has this in his first critique, he has aesthetics, which means basically how we experience space and time and the relations of cause and effect and things like that. And then the second meaning is the meaning more like how we respond both to works of art, but also to beautiful and sublime things in nature, which we can't help responding to in special ways. So I don't have a theory of aesthetics because I said I'm not a philosopher. I'm not able to really think in those systematic terms, but I read and try to transform and think through these various works, which include philosophical works like Whitehead and Deleuze, but also more often include things like science fiction novels or music videos or movies or things like that.
네, 제 미학에 대해서 질문해 주셨는데, 제 미학 이론에 대해서 질문해 주셨는데, 제가 이론가로서 이론을 구축하고 있는지는 잘 모르겠다라고 하셨습니다. 그 이유는 제가 철학자가 아니기 때문에 체계적으로 미학 이론을 기대되는 그 수준으로 글을 쓰기보다는 문화 비평가로서 영화나 뮤직비디오나 다른 작품들이 우리를 어떻게 느끼게 하는지, 그러니까 문화적 작업들이 무엇을 다루는지, 우리가 어떻게 그것에 반응하는지 이런 것들에 더 관심이 있고, 그리고 곧 출판될 슬라임홀, 그러니까 그게 뭔지 잘 모르겠는데 슬라임 같이 약간 그 유동체 이런 것 같은데 그런 것에 대해서도 관심이 있고, 또 어쨌든 칸트가 미학이란 단어를, 에스테틱스란 단어를 두 가지 의미로 쓰는데, 하나는 그 원인과 결과와 관련된 의미로 쓰기도 하지만, 두 번째는 우리가 자연에 어떻게 반응하는지, 그리고 미와 그 숭고의 경험이 어떻게 특정한 방식으로, 특별한 방식으로 작동을 하는지, 그런 것에 관심을 가지는 것에 저도 흥미가 있고, 그리고 델레즈나 화이트헤드처럼 다양한 그 저자들, 그리고 다양한 작품들, 뮤직비디오, 영화, 많은 작품들에서 미학이 어떻게 해석할 수 있는지, 그런 것들에 더 관심을 가지고 있습니다. 네. 오케이.
Okay. Is the contemporary era an era of aesthetics?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's a difficult question because I have to say both yes and no at the same time. I think worldwide contemporary late capitalism, if we call it that, or neoliberal capitalism, or I mean, there are other terms, seems to very much emphasize surfaces and appearances, and therefore it's very attuned aesthetically in the way that maybe earlier centuries weren't, or in a different way than the 20th century, the 19th century, 18th century were in Western culture. And again, it's hard for me to speak about worldwide. I mean, everything is kind of wonderfully and terribly mixed up right now, but it's difficult for me to be able to think that I really understand everything that's going on. But I'd say, so in a certain sense, yes, we're in a special age where aesthetic appearances are especially emphasized, maybe more than they were 50 years ago or 100 years ago. But at the same time, it's a very particular kind of thing because you cannot separate that from the fact that everything is so much contained within a kind of global capitalist machine, which turns everything into commodities. And that, people we identify ourselves by, this is true of young people, but it's also true of old people like me. We identify ourselves very much by what commodities and what aesthetic looks we buy into. And so there's a certain sense in which is very, I don't know, this is not a wonderful thing, but a kind of very corrupt and disturbing thing. It's sort of like part of the way that even when you try to oppose the ruling order of how things are, it gets sucked back into it and gets, in the 20th century, a lot of artists wanted to resist becoming commodities. They want to make things that couldn't be sold and bought. But it's very hard. I mean, today you sort of have the sense that everything gets bought and sold and absorbed in that way. And it's very hard to stand outside, and that's obviously very disturbing. And I'm not a brilliant political theorist, so I don't have any idea how to escape from this. But it seems to be a characteristic that how the aesthetics have become. So we are in an age of aesthetics, but that's only because, or it's partly because aesthetics has become something which I think is dangerous and harmful to people. So I don't have any simple answer.
Did you say that in 20th century, people were more
There was
had
a
more
20th century.
resistant? Yeah, sorry,
20th century
resistance. Okay, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
20th century modernism often
Ah.
wanted to be resistant to,
Yeah.
but in 21st century, that's much harder to do.
Okay.
I mean,
okay.
it's more complicated because 20th century had different political valences, like,
Mm.
But
Okay.
anyway.
아주 어려운 질문인데요. 그렇다라고도 할 수 있고, 그러니까 현재가 동시대가 미학의 시대냐라는 질문에 그렇다라고도 할 수 있고, 그렇지 않다고도 할 수 있기 때문에 그런데 일단 후기 자본주의 또 자유주의를 생각을 하면은 일단 그 전보다 외모나 표면적인 것, 미적인 것에 대해서 더 관심을 많이 갖는 것 같기는 합니다. 지금 그 전 세계가 다양하게 섞이고 있고 아주 다양하게 이렇게 펼쳐지고 있기 때문에 세계 전체가 어떻게 되고 있다에 대해서 코멘트하기 말하기 어렵지만 뭔가 표면이나 외적인 것에 대해서 한 5, 60년 아니면 그 이전보다 비교해서 더 많은 강조가 있는 것 같은데 근데 그 말은 방금 다시 여쭤본 것처럼 그 20세기에는 적어도 외적인 것에 그렇게 집중하는 것에 대한 저항, 거기에 대한 거부 같은 것이 있었는데 근데 그 이유는 모든 것이 상품화되고 그러니까 재화가 되고 우리가 우리 자신을 우리가 구입할 수 있는 물건들을 통해서 바라보는 것, 그것과 거의 일치시키는 것이 불편하다라는 생각이 있었는데 그 불편함이 없어진 것이 관찰되고 없어진 것이 또 누군가를 불편하게 하는 것 같다라고 느낍니다. 제가 정치 이론으로서 이걸 충분히 더 발전시키지 못했지만 어쨌든 이런 면들이 관찰이 되는 것 같습니다. 오케이.
Okay. So should I go to
Yeah.
second?
I will first read that in Korean for the audience.
Okay.
신지혜님의 질문입니다. 제목을 기준 없이로 짓게 된 이유가 무엇인가요? 사물들의 우주에서의 생각과 달라진 부분이 있다면 이렇게 두 가지 질문인데, so two questions from 신지혜.
Yeah.
So the first one is, how did you come up with the title?
well,
Yeah.
Actually, I was trying to figure out what to call. I was writing this book and I was trying to figure out what to call it.
Mhm.
And a friend of mine suggested Without Criteria as a title. And I said, yes, that's perfect, because the whole point which I'm trying to make about aesthetics, and even in Kant aesthetic judgment and more modern versions of that, is that it doesn't operate on the barrier of criteria and norms. And you have a criteria and you apply it by looking at whether a certain thing corresponds to it or not, or how well it corresponds to it. And my whole argument is that is not how aesthetics works. It's obviously how other things work. I mean, political decisions or, questions in science of what is true and things like that. But it doesn't work for aesthetics. So aesthetics I'm arguing that aesthetics is quite literally without criteria. So though I didn't come up with the title, a friend of mine suggested to me, I said, yes, that's right.
질문에 대해서 많이 고민했는데 맨 끝에 먼저 어떤 친구분이 그런 제안을 해주셨다고 합니다. 기준 없이라는 제목이 어때? 그랬더니 바로 그거야라고 하셨다고 하는데 일단 미학은 다른 분야와는 다르게 어떤 칸트에서 더 그게 강조되고 더 근대, 더 현대 다른 미학 이론가들에게도 더 강조되는 점이 어떤 규범이나 기준에 맞춰서 모든 것의 체계를 갖추는 다른 분야는 그런 것들이 유효한 경우도 종종 있지만 적어도 미학에서는 그렇지 않기 때문에 좋은 제목이라고 생각했다고 하십니다. And the second question was is there any important difference or
It's hard. Yeah, yes.
transformation between your book?
It's
Yeah.
it's hard for me to know because I don't think there's anything I wrote in this earlier book, which in the later book I said I disagree. That's wrong. I now think something else. But the way I write is that, you know, I respond to things that I read or hear or see or come upon. So that criteria is published in a few years before The Universe of Things, like 5 years before. And in the time between those is when I sort of encountered the philosophers of speculative realism, who, despite my disagreements with a lot of things they say, seem to be doing something genuinely new and interesting. And so it's a different book because I'm responding to different and new things. So that's the best I can say. I think all the ideas I have in my books come from what I've read or listened to or seen. I don't think I have original ideas. I think I'm relaying and transforming things I get from elsewhere. I think that may be true for a lot of people, but it's definitely true for me.
오케이. 이전에 썼던 거를 내가 나중에 그 동의를 하지 않거나 그런 정도로 큰 변화나 그런 것은 없지만, 모든 것은 이렇게 그 듣고 보고 하는 것에 대한 반응이나 영향이 있을 수 있는데, 그 기준업 씨와 그 언급하신 사물의 우주는 5년의 시간 차이가 있는데, 그 5년의 시간 차이, 그 시간 동안 사변적 실제론을 새롭게 접하셨고, 사변적 실제론에 동의하지 않는 점도 많이 있지만 거기서 새로운 것, 또 다른 것을 공부하셨고 보셨고 받아들이게 됐다. 그래서 나는 독창적인 사상가라기보다는 뭐 많은 사람들이 그런 것과 마찬가지로 그렇게 공부하고 흡수하고 배운 것들을 전달하는 역할을 하기 때문에 한다고 보고 있기 때문에 그런 변화가 그런 정도의 변화는 있을 것이다라고 하셨습니다. 오케이. The third person, 정소담. 왜 화이트헤드의 과정 철학을 들레즈와 연결지어 구축론을 사유하게 되었는가? 왜 화이트헤드인가? So, yeah, why did you get
Okay.
interested
Yes,
in Whitehead? Yeah.
well, I mean, I had never read Whitehead before around 2002. I mean, I had spent years and decades in graduate school and then as a professor, and I read a lot of these French post-structuralist texts, especially. I mean, I had some familiarity with earlier philosophers like Spinoza and Kant, but I got educated in especially people like Derrida and Foucault and Deleuze, and they became a central basis of how I thought about things. And I didn't know much about Whitehead at all, he was generally ignored, as I said, in most philosophical circles. And I basically found out about Whitehead by reading Isabel Stengers's book, which came out in French in 2002, and with some friends of mine who were also people who worked on Deleuze, who were very close to Stengers. And I started reading, so I just started reading Whitehead while I started reading Stengers's commentary on Whitehead. And it just was, I mean, basically, the things I might think about for 30 years before I write about them, the things I may love but never write about. But there are also sometimes I encounter something new and it just kind of blows me away or astonishes me in some way, and I want to figure it out better. And so that's the reason for, Whitehead I read a lot of things. I try to read a lot of new things, but Whitehead just struck me, even though he was almost a century old, he struck me with something that I had never encountered before and that seemed new and different, and that I want to work through what it was about. And in context with Deleuze, I think it's partly because Stengers herself is very close to, she's still alive, is very close to the late Deleuze. And the other people who knew Stengers, who basically introduced me to this, are also people who work on Deleuze. And Deleuze was a framework I had in general because I had been reading for so long. So that's why, again, there are a lot of people who are arguing now that it makes a kind of sense for them to be connected, but again, others might not think so. And again, so it's partly that I'm coming from a milieu in which these two thinkers were placed next to each other, and learning about to read Whitehead for the first time was an exciting thing for me, and that's what I wanted to work through. So that's the best answer why Whitehead and why Whitehead and Deleuze.
오케이. 네. 2002년 이전에는 화이트헤드를 잘 알지를 못했습니다. 대학원을 다닐 동안이나 교수로 있는 동안에도 주로 프랑스 후기 구조주의, 데리다, 푸코, 델레즈 이런 사람들을 주로 읽고 스피노자, 칸트도 읽긴 했지만 어쨌든 데리다, 푸코, 델레즈 같은 후기 구조주의가 나의 트레이닝, 나의 훈련의 전부였고 나의 생각하는 틀이었는데, 화이트헤드는 철학계에서 많이 무시되기도 했는데, 근데 2002년에 프랑스에서 나온 벨기에 철학자, 아직도 살아계신 이자벨 스탄게스의 책을 읽고 화이트헤드를 새롭게 발견하게 된 것 같습니다. 화이트헤드에서 완전 새로운 것들, 거의 100년 전에 쓰인 글들인데 거의 전혀 생각지도 못했던 새로운 것들, 내가 앞으로 내 생각에 갔으면 좋겠다라고 생각했던 것들을 거기서 발견했고, 또 아직 생각지도 못했던 것들을 발견했는데, 사실 생각해보면 들레즈의 맥락에서 왜 화이트헤드가 부각이 되는지 생각해보면 벨기에 철학자 스탄게스가 실제로 들레즈랑도 개인적으로 아주 가까웠고 내가 들레즈를 오래 읽고 있었기 때문에 그 연결이 이 둘이 나란히 놓이는 환경이 이렇게 어색하지 않고 오히려 자연스러웠다, 이렇게 답을 해주셨습니다. Yeah. So Stanges was personally close to Deleuze at the same time, intellectually, philosophically. Is that what?
Yeah. See, I mean, she's much younger. She's a generation younger than Deleuze, but yes, she was personally close to Deleuze.
Okay.
And a lot of her work communicates with his.
Okay. 네, 실제로 개인적으로도 가까운 사이였다고 합니다. 한 세대 젊었음에도. 네, 오케이. Now the third person.
Structure, system.
Structure and system. Yeah. 구축론이 말하는 구조나 체계에 대한 부연 설명을 부탁드립니다. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, that's a very hard question, and it's so central. Basically, a lot of what I studied as undergraduate and as a graduate student, and before I became a professor, had to do with understanding things like systems, because this is a lot of the background of 19th and 20th century thought. So, I mean, the so-called French structuralists were interested in how things interrelated and how an individual entity only was what it was because of its part in a larger structure. The post-structuralists, like people like Derrida, were skeptical of this but unwilling to dismiss it. So they kind of put you in a place where you move in between. Things are separate when a certain thing is separate from everything else, and a certain thing is interconnected with everything else. And it's frustrating, but those are sort of true at the same time. So nothing has meaning outside of the system of relations in which it's caught up in. But nothing can be just reduced to being just an effect of the system. It's understood it, and that, I mean, to me, that's what makes the post-structuralists different from the structuralists of the earlier generation, like Levi-Strauss. But then I see a similar thing going on in both Whitehead and Deleuze, though they're coming from very different places. In that you have to think about relations, but you also have to think about how instances can be singular, which means that they're not reducible to those relations. I mean, this. So I don't know how to say it better than that. I mean, there are a lot of philosophical work which deals with it in a very abstract way, and there's other work I more tend to read which will take this in a context but do other things with it. And I mean, again, this goes back, it seems to be an essential way to think in modern thought. It goes back, it seems to be has roots in Marx and in Darwin, for instance, in the 19th century, in that Marx insists that we have to understand the social system in terms of its relations, and that Darwin insists that because of evolution, living things have all these relations of where they've come from and where they're going to. But again, it's so the French structuralists in the mid-20th century probably made it a little too simplistic. The later thought in the later 20th century of the French post-structuralists is sort of prodding it and pushing it into more configurations without rejecting it. So that's the best answer I can give.
오케이. 이것도 아주 어렵고, 또 아주 중요한 중심적인 질문입니다. 학교를 다닐 때 많은 교수님들이 그 책의 구조를 통해서 생각하는 교수님들이 많았습니다. 19세기, 20세기 철학이 그런 것이기도 했고요. 특히 프랑스 구조주의는 개인을 더 큰 구조의 한 부분이라고, 그러니까 개인의 의미를 그렇게 구조의 부분으로 파악했는데, 데리다 등 더 뒤에 나온 사상가들은 여기에 회의적이어서 어떤 것은 그 완전히 구조로부터 분리 가능하고 또 상호작용 그리고 연결이 되어 있지만 또 분리되고 그런 작용을 더 언급하면서 그 자기 전 세대 프랑스 구조주의를 비판하기도 합니다. 그러니까 어떤 것들은 시스템 바깥에 있다라는 그러니까 관계가 시스템의 바깥에서 의미를 가진다라는 걸 데리다 등이 비판하면서 후기 구조주의와 그 전에 초기 구조주의, 레비 스트라우스를 비롯한 그 사람들과 다른 점인데, 그래서 결국 후기 구조주의에서 관계, 독특성, 환원될 수 없는 독특성 같은 것들이 더 강조가 됩니다. 그런데 마르크스나 다윈들을 같은 사상가들을 생각해 보면 그들도 구조 체계로 사유를 했는데 어떻게 보면 그들보다 20세기 중기의 그 프랑스 구조주의자들이 조금 더 단순했다고도 생각을 합니다. 그걸 이제 후기 구조주의자들이 비판했다고 보고요. Okay, yeah, that was very difficult to translate.
Because I'm very vague in terms of what I was saying.
Yeah.
Materialism and
yeah. First, the sentence in Korean. So 유물론과 비유물론을 이렇게 그 하나의 선으로 그릴 수 있다면 어디쯤 그 유물론과 비유물론 사이 어디쯤 자신을 위치시키고 싶으신지. So materialism and non-materialism.
Okay. Again, I would have to say that I'm a materialist, and that, but what matter is and what material is and what it means to be materialist is itself a very difficult question. So, I mean, I do not believe in anything supernatural or anything transcendent. I mean, that's maybe just my background and what I think. But when we talk about matter and material, it sort of means different things. I mean, if you look at history of recent Western thought, it's often they take whatever technology is most new and apply that to everything else. So in the 17th and 18th centuries, they thought human beings could be thought of as machines, these parts which interacted and did these things. In the 20th century, it's more common to say that people are computers. I mean, computers are material entities, but they have this other level. The software is running on the hardware, but the software is doing all these computationally strange things. I'm a little suspicious about either metaphor, but let's say I don't believe there's anything outside of the material universe. Okay, and again, I can't justify that. That's my basic starting point. But what is matter and what is material and how does it work is a big question. There's a historian at Stanford University in the US named Jessica Riskin, R-I-S-K-I-N, and she's written about the history of these ideas about machines and matter and things like that. And what she points out is that in Western thought in the 18th, 19th century, there are several different trends. One sees material or matter in the most reductionist. These are pieces of dead stuff which just get combined in various ways. The other sees matter as itself inherently active and moving and doing things. So like atoms in the void do weird things, and certainly modern physics tells us that nobody understands what the weirdness really is on the quantum level or whatever. I mean, so I don't think saying that everything's material means that you have to dismiss certain things as being, nonsensical or superstitions. I think I don't see, my understanding of the universe doesn't allow me to see anything aside from what basically ultimately is composed of these, quantum states and subatomic particles. But, we don't understand those. The more we look at them, the weirder they seem and the more strange things they do. And again, how we explain life compared to non-living things. There are very scientific ways we can understand certain thresholds, but again, even for life, matter does strange things and goes into all these odd states and interacts in bizarre ways. So what I'm saying basically is I'm a materialist. I don't believe in anything traditionally, non-material, like a spiritual realm or a realm of consciousness, whatever, as being separate from matter. But again, matter itself is not a settled issue for our understanding today. I mean, it's very strange. So life is strange, but all matter is strange.
오케이. 유물론자라고 해야 할 것 같습니다. 근데 여기서 그 물질, 유물론이 뭐라고 볼지가 중요하고 그게 어려운 지점입니다. 그러니까 어떤 초자연적인 것이나 초월적인 것을 특별히 믿지는 않지만 그 매터, 그러니까 물질, 사물, 이라고 하는 건 많은 다양한 의미를 가질 수 있습니다. 그러니까 전통적으로 기술은 새롭고 새로운 것에 적용되는 것으로 봤는데 그게 등장할 때 19세기에는 이제 기계들이 강조가 됐고 20세기에는 사람을 컴퓨터에 비유하기도 했습니다. 그러니까 그 사람이 기계라거나 컴퓨터라거나 이 두 가지 메타포에 의구심이 들기는 하지만 어쨌든 초현실적인 거나 초월보다는 그 뭐였죠? 물질을 중시하는 유물론에 더 가까운데 근데 유물론을 내가 정당화하기는 힘들고 그것을 나의 사유의 시작점이라고 생각하는 편입니다. 제시카 레스킨이라는 영국의 저자가 있는데 그 기계와 물질에 대한 그 물질의 역사에 대한 책을 썼다고 합니다. 그러니까 물질을 두 가지 방식으로 생각할 수 있는데 하나는 물질을 죽은 것으로 보는 시각입니다. 근데 또 다른 건 물질을 그 원자 단계 또는 양자 단계에서는 이상하지만 그게 마치 살아있는 것처럼 뭔가 이상하게 활동하는 것처럼 보는 시각이 있습니다. 그러니까 여기에 어떤 미신 같은 걸 부여하고자 하는 건 아니지만 물질이 그렇게 정의하기 쉽지가 않고 또 이상한 방식으로 이해가 되기도 한다는 거. 그리고 삶이란 물질도 삶도 주변 물질 환경과 이렇게 상호작용하고 그리고 그 방식은 이상하고 독특하다고 볼 수 있습니다. 그러니까 물질에 전혀 기반하지 않은 영적 세계를 크게 생각하지 않지만 그런 신비 같은 것을 완전히 배제하는 건 아니라고 하셨습니다. 오케이.
Okay.
And then 문지영 님께서 질문해 주셨습니다. 어떤 자극이 가장 큰 계기가 되었을까요? 예술가에게 꼭 하시고 싶은 말씀이 있으시다면 이거였습니다. So what was your inspiration and your words for artist?
Yeah, that's okay. That's hard because, I mean, I probably have to list everything. I mean, no. Okay, that's a little silly. I'm coming out of an interest in literature, art, film, music, and things like that. And I can list various in literature. As an undergraduate in college, I studied 19th and 20th century British and American literature mostly. But that's also the time when I started watching movies a lot. So, I mean, a lot of my sensibility comes from, I mean, everybody today watches movies from the time they were small children, but it's when I was in college that I started watching things like the French New Wave of the 19. This is the 19. I was in the 19. This is the 1970s. I watched a lot of the French New Wave of the 1960s. I watched a lot of the other masters of world cinema from multiple different countries, and mostly from the 60s onward. And so the kind of new waves and modernisms in cinema are very important to me. In terms of music, I don't feel I'm as knowledgeable about music as I am about other things. I certainly listen to a lot of punk rock music in the 1970s, and I listened to a lot of experimental jazz in the 1980s. Just as some example, but there are other things as well. So a lot of my work has been trying to think about what do I make of all this stuff. I started out in graduate school studying canonical Anglo-American literature of the 19th and 20th centuries, but I went beyond that. There's a lot of reading I do now, which is not necessarily canonical literature. I mean, much of what I read these days is science fiction novels, and these are usually English language novels, both of the last 20 years, but also of the 20th century. But I also try to read translations of science fiction from other languages, because I think there's a lot of exciting things going on around the world. But I don't know a lot of, I mean, it depends on what gets translated and how much I have a chance to read. So, I mean, I guess my general sensibility comes from kind of mix up of all these different things. And aside from that, I grew up in the 1960s and 1970s, which were a time of political ferment in the United States, as well as in many places around the world. And despite the fact that all our hopes then have been disappointed, I think, that's part of my background, and my left-wing, generally political commitments are important, even though I'm not much of an activist. I don't really do very much or anything, but it's there in the constellation of everything I think about. So I'm not sure that's a good enough answer. I mean, in terms of what I would want to say to artists, I'm not sure what I can say to them. I think, follow your own inspiration is the most important thing. And, but it's a magical thing. I never know, there's some things which people love and I read and go, so that's okay. I think it's well done, but it doesn't talk to me in any way. So it's really a question of, what grabs me, what talks to me, but often that's the thing which surprises me rather than something I could have said. I mean, one of the reasons I have this aesthetic attitude in general is because I think that, science fiction writers and poets and musicians often come up with stuff which I would never have thought of in a million years. I mean, I'm not creative in that way, and I wouldn't have thought of it once I encounter it. It sets things off in my mind and makes me excited, and that drives what I try to write about, I guess.
Okay. 많은 것에서 영감을 얻었는데 특히 문학, 예술, 미술, 영화, 음악 이런 것들에서 특히 영감을 얻는데 학부 시절에는 19세기 영국, 미국, 영미 소설 작품들을 문학 작품들을 많이 봤고 또 1960년대, 1970년대 그 프렌치 뉴 웨이브, 한국말로도 그냥 프랑스 뉴 웨이브라고 하는 것 같은데 그 프랑스 뉴 웨이브 세계 그 프랑스 영화 감독들의 작품들, 그리고 세계의 다른 나라의 영화 거장들의 작품을 많이 봤고, 그래서 모더니즘이 나에게 아주 중요한 영감이었습니다. 펑크락 그리고 실험 재즈 80년대 그런 것들도 좋아하고요. 그리고 그래서 나의 작업은 그 글쓰기 작업도 이 문화 작품들을 어떻게 볼 것인가, 이걸 가지고 무엇을 할 것인가, 이런 것에 서 시작된 것 같습니다. 그리고 SF 소설들도 많은 영감을 주는데 지난 20년 동안 쓰인 것들은 주로 보지만 다른 언어로 쓰인 그 SF 소설들도 번역이 되면 다 읽으려고 노력을 하고 있습니다. 그리고 다른 영감이라고 하면 1960년대, 70년대 공부하던 시절에 정치적인 큰 변화가 주변에 있었는데 그래서 그 정치적인 영향 그러니까 내가 내 스스로를 아주 그 활동가라고 보지는 않지만 좌파 진영에서의 움직임이 많은 것들을 나에게 전달해 준 것 같습니다. 그리고 예술가들에게 무엇을 말할지는 잘 모르겠습니다. 너의 영감을 따라라. 너가 사랑하는 것들, 좋아하는 것들을 작업으로 만들어라. 이런 말을 할 수 있겠지만, 근데 많은 작가들은 SF 작가들을 비롯해서 많은 음악가들은 내가 평생 생각도 해보지도 못한 것을 창의적으로, 창조적으로 표현하는 것을 보고 놀라기도 합니다. 그러니까 끊임없이 그렇게 했으면 좋겠습니다. 네. Okay, and there was the questions from, yeah, the question we sent you in advance, and there are
Yeah.
many questions on the chat.
Well, I'll try. I mean,
Okay, we got, yes, half an hour, so I will go through quickly.
okay.
We had a question from Belnus. Belnus. Thank you for your lecture. I've read your books that are translated into Korean, and those books inspired me so much. I have two questions. I had the impression that you had some negative view on panpsychism. Is that the correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. In this book, but in Universe of Things, I feel that you are accepting it with more positive
Mhm.
tone, and I wanna hear about this difference, and you also highlight, like Jane Bennett, the vitality, the vitality of matters in your recent books. So, how do you think the relationship between vitalism and panpsychism?
Yeah. Okay. That's a great question. Part of the thing is that I'm at the limits of, I mean, nobody really knows. So, so whatever I think, I try to not be too dogmatic about it or too sure about it. I think the argument for, I mean, panpsychism is the argument that thinking or feeling or something which we think of as mental is already an intrinsic quality of all matter. And one of the biggest arguments for that is where does it come from if it's not already there? I mean, it's very hard. I mean, I read a lot of things by philosophers who talk about mind and cognition, and some of them are welcoming these kinds of ideas, and others are basically being very reductionistic and said, I mean, maybe we think of ourselves, our own inner mental life, as being we take it more seriously than it should be, and it's really epiphenomenal. I mean, I honestly don't know. I think that the panpsychism is a strong argument. I hadn't really read about it when I wrote With That Criteria. Universe of Things is later, after I've been reading more about it, and so I learned more, and I was more open to it. I mean, again, it's hard for me at this point. It's hard for me to say that anybody really knows or anybody can tell, though I think people are wrong to just dismiss panpsychism instead of to at least take it seriously as a possibility. As for living things, again, there are problems with vitalism, since we understand to some extent the physical and chemical basis of how biological systems work. And so I don't want to say that there's some kind of, there's different kinds of vitalism. The old vitalists in the 19th century and early 20th sort of thought there must be some kind of life force intrinsic to all the things which are alive, which made them different than things that weren't. And that seems much less tenable today. But people like Jane Bennett or Gilles Deleuze, I mean, sort of see a certain kind of vitality which may exist in all matter, but which is raised to a much higher degree in things which are alive. And that seems reasonable to me. And in particular, I'm interested in, I think that as far as I can tell from scientific articles I read as well as anything else, is that all living things possess a certain thing which we might call thought or sentience or mentality, which basically means that they are not just mechanistic systems, they respond flexibly to their encounters with the rest of the world. So, and there are different degrees, but I think it seems clearly it's true of slime. I've written about slime molds and I've written about plants, and they both have a certain degree of this, it seems, from everything we can tell from what scientists have done.
Okay, let me make one point clear before I translate.
Right.
So you think those who write on minds and cognition tend to be a reductionist?
No, they're both extremes, from the most reductionist to the most expansive among. In other words, philosophers who discuss this have no consensus. It's such an incredibly wide. So they go every possible degree from totally reductionist to totally expansive. And
Okay, okay.
A philosopher who says that and gives good arguments for it. So it's very confusing.
So reductionist in naturalist sense. That's the two extremes. Yeah.
Reductive in a sense. I mean, well, this might get too complicated. I'm thinking.
Okay. Yeah.
There was a Daniel Dennett just died today. He was a very well-known American philosopher, and he sort of poo-pooed. I mean, other philosophers written about what does it mean to experience pain, or to experience the color red, or to experience a certain type of sound. And he sort of poo-pooed that. He said, it's not very much. People are taking it too seriously. I mean, it's not really a big deal, which people should, So, I mean, he was very reductionistic about it. Others are more positive about it. I mean, I wrote about this much more in Universe of Things, which is a later book.
Okay. Yeah.
And also in some of my science fiction books. But anyway, it's I don't pretend to have the answer to this, because it's among the thing where there's absolutely, the more I read about, the more I realize there's no consensus whatsoever. The smartest people in the world, the people who are professionally dealing with it, are all over the map in what they think about it.
Okay.
Every possible degree.
이 주제에 대해서 너무 그 독단적인 생각을 가지 않으려고 노력을 합니다. 범심론, 그러니까 범심론은 모든 존재하는 것이 어떤 감정, 느낌이다. 그러니까 존재하는 것이 다 정신적인 것이다라는 관점인데, 방금 그 제가 재차 질문 드린 것가 그것에 대한 건데, 그 정신이나, 그러니까 심리나 인식에 대해서 글을 쓴 사람들에 대한 글을 읽으면 전혀 동의가 없는 것 같습니다. 그러니까 이게 굉장히 세상에서 아주 똑똑한 사람들이 이 문제에 달려들곤 하는데, 극과 극으로 어떤 사람들은 완전히 유물론자고, 어떤 사람들은 완전히 그 유물론의 범심론에 가까운 경향을 띠기도 합니다. 데니엘 데넷이란 유명한 철학자가 있는데, 그러니까 어제 돌아가셨네요. 저도 몰랐는데 4월 19일에 돌아가셨는데, 그분 같은 경우에는 완전히 환원주의적이지만 거기에도 여러 가지 그 얘기할 것들이 있고, 그리고 어쨌든 그 기준 없이를 쓸 때 거기에 열려 있었지만, 그 누군가 이 문제를 완전히, 그러니까 증명하기도, 완전히 부정하기도 어려운 문제라고 생각합니다. 그리고 살아있는 것들에 대해서는 그 19세기, 20세기 초반에 그 생철학 또는 그 활기론이 있었는데, 그때는 그 생기, 라이프 포스 같은 것들을 제안을 했는데, 그것은 현재 더 이상 좀 유지하기 어려운 입장으로 봅니다. 하지만 제인 데넷이나 들레즈 같은 사람이 말하는 생기는 더 높은 차원으로 그 설명할 수 있는 것 같고, 더 설득력이 있는 것으로 보입니다. 그리고 관련된 논문들을 보면은 모든 살아있는 것들이 어느 방식이건 생각, 사유, 감정, 느낌, 이런 것들을 갖고 있는 것 같습니다. 다른 예들도 또 들어주셨고요. 네. Yeah, and the second question was I think there are differences rather than affinities between Whitehead's idea of possibility and Deleuze's idea of potentiality. Deleuze's potentiality is about the real, the actual things, and on the other hand, the Whitehead's possibility seems to be it's referring to a former aspect of things. And what is how do you see the ontological difference between Whitehead's possibility and Deleuze's potentiality?
Okay, that's a great question. They don't have the same view of it, but I think they're related in certain ways. I mean, and at least in contemporary American philosophy, possibility really means non-contradiction. So anything which is not a logical contradiction is possible, according to many contemporary American philosophers. And the trouble with that is it's not very useful. I mean, let's put it this way, what if suddenly my skin would turn totally green? So it'd be totally green instead of my actual color. There's no logical contradiction in that happening, but there's no reason why it should happen either. So, I mean, surrealism often plays with things which are just totally ridiculous and happen for no reason. But I think for both Whitehead and Deleuze, they want to differentiate a stronger sense of possibility of that something could happen, of what could make something happen, and that not everything which simply is not contradictory is included in that. Okay, so they do it in different ways, but Whitehead and Deleuze try to get some kind of sense of how certain things make sense to think of as possibilities and potentialities, because though there's no guarantee they'll happen, they could happen, as opposed to just anything that's not illogical or self-contradictory could happen. And they formulate it different ways, but they both think that, for Deleuze, potentiality is real. The phrase Deleuze uses, which I like, is real but not actual. Actual is the current state of affairs, physical state of affairs in the world. There are many things which are not actual, but some of them are nonetheless. Deleuze is real because objects or people contain certain powers within them, powers which could manifest themselves in certain circumstances and could do things. So potentiality is not actual because it's not what's being expressed now, but it's something that could be expressed because the nature of a body, whether it's a chemical substance or whether it's a human being or whatever, has the ability to, under certain circumstances, to do something or other. So Whitehead, the question is correct that Whitehead puts it more in terms of the past, but it's still things sort of respond to other things. So a certain thing can happen is possible if the configuration of the world allows an entity to receive, as it receives what has happened in the past, to do something different with it. Now, again, that's not everything that is not logically contradictory is possible in that sense. But so they do it in subtly different ways. But the more important thing to me is that they both are not satisfied with saying that anything that isn't a logical contradiction is thereby possible. Well, that's kind of literally true on a very low level. But they argue that things have powers which allow them to do certain things and not others. So I mean, and that's the way I would answer
that. Okay, so do you think that Deleuze and Whitehead provides an alternative to contemporary American philosophers' idea that possibility is non-contradiction? Was that the final?
This comes, I mean, yes, what I'm calling the idea they both pose comes from Hume in the 18th century, but goes on to American analytic philosophers. David Lewis, who died a few years ago, is one example. I mean, a lot of American analytic philosophy basically says anything's possible which is not contradictory. And Deleuze and Whitehead in different ways are dissatisfied with that. They say that's literally true in a very reductive sense. But in terms of what actually happens in the world, certain things are potentials, could happen, and other things though they're not
Mhm, mhm.
contradictory logically, are not going to happen because there's no impetus to make them happen.
Okay, okay.
I hope that was clear.
yeah.
Difficult because
들레즈랑 화이트헤드의 그 잠재력과 가능성은 물론 같지는 않습니다. 거기에 중요한 차이들도 있고 하지만 그 동시대 미국 철학자들, 그러니까 우리 시대의 미국 철학자들은 가능성을 모순되지 않은 것이면 모두 가능하다라고 보는 경향이 강합니다. 그러니까 예를 들자면 내 피부가 지금 다른 색으로 바뀔 수 있는 완전히 뭐 초록색이나 뭐 이런 식으로 바뀔 수 있는 것은 그런 일이 일어나지는 않겠지만 어떤 논리적인 모순을 일으키지는 않기 때문에 가능한 것으로 보는 그런 경향입니다. 그러니까 이런 의미에서의 그 강한 의미에서의 가능성이란 것과 그 들레즈나 화이트헤드가 말하는 가능성, 잠재성은 좀 다른 의미를 가지고 그리고 일종의 대안을 제시할 수 있을 거라고 생각합니다. 그러니까 들레즈에게서 그 잠재성은 일어나지 않을 수 없다면 일어날 수 있다라거나 잠깐만요. 제가 그런 게 아니라 그 들레즈가 잘 쓰는 표현인데 제가 좋아하는 표현인데 real but not actual. 그러니까 실제하지만 실제하지는 않은, 그러니까 실제아이지만 실제하지는 않은, 어이는 아닌, 그러니까 현실이지만 현상적이진 않은, 이건 리얼 액츄얼 다들 네, 번역하기 나르지만 어쨌든 그런 생각을 하는데 그러니까 어떤 상황에서 어떻게 행동할 수 있는지, 어떻게 그 어떤 상황 아래에서 행위, 이걸 더 강조하는 것 같습니다. 그리고 화이트헤드도 가능성 개념에서 강조하는 것이 반응이고 세계의 구성 안에서 다르게 반응할 수 있는, 그러니까 반응의 변화 가능성, 이런 것을 좀 더 강조합니다. 그러니까 세세하게는 두 사람이 다르지만 그 앞에서 말한 그 동시대 미국 철학자들이 보는 그런 강한 종류의 그 가능성 개념과는 다른 것을 제시해 주는 것 같아서 관심이 그렇습니다. 네. Okay, that was really a difficult question. And the next one is really long. Yeah. I have translation here. So from Baek Woo In, the question goes: singularities is also on the chat. Singularities are being and it's not on your chat. It's on my chat.
Okay.
So I will read. Singularities are beings and their feelings are singular. Then is the meaning of aesthetics something that is the meaning of aesthetics something that is difficult to speak logically about, but something that is individually felt? I don't get what is. So I also wonder what's the differences between the feeling of Whitehead and the feeling of the feeling spoken by brain scientists, neuroscientists. Did you understand that question? Yeah.
not entirely, but let me try to.
Yeah.
I don't know. Part of the difficulty is that Whitehead sometimes uses very ordinary English words like feeling, but he says, I have a special technical sense to it. So it's not what it normally means. But obviously he wants us to think of what it normally means, which, I mean, feeling can be a very vague word. But Whitehead wants to think about how any entity responds to the other entities which it prehends. So for Whitehead, every entity which is a thing localized in both time and space. So I'm a different entity than it was 5 minutes ago, though I inherit from that other entity. But every entity is sort of responding to what comes in. You don't create out of nothing, but you're getting all these impressions, feelings, ideas. Can be everything from the, physical feeling to something very complex and intellectual. They're all coming in, and I I may not all understand them, but they affect me in some way, and I try to respond to them. And I may respond to them just by repeating them, or just by rejecting them, or by doing something more creative with them. But that's sort of what feeling means for Whitehead. So, there are questions about how this relates to, lots of philosophers and aestheticians and things I've talked about the problem that not everything can be translated into abstract language. Language is limited, and there are often things which we can't quite get the right words for. Partly when anybody writes, when a creative writer writes, they're trying to get something which starts out maybe not linguistically into language, but there are things which can't be expressed in language. It's also, think of music. Not everything in music which affects somebody who listens to it can be translated into this is what it means. So, I think, I'm not sure I understood the question, but I think that's sort of what I think White is trying to get at and what I'm trying to get at. If that makes any sense at all.
질문을 저도 죄송합니다. 제가 잘 이해하지 못했지만 어쨌든 답을 해보자면 화이트헤드에게서 그 느낌, 감정, 느낌이란 건 이 가장 중요한 건 반응입니다. 외부에서 들어오고 모든 것에 대해서 어떻게 반응하는지, 그것을 받아들일지 받아들이지 않을지, 그것을 받아들이고 그것에 대해 그 반응이 나갈지 안 나갈지 열려 있는 그런 상태의 과정 같은 것을 말합니다. 그러니까 어떤 것 가운데 있는 곳인데 다른 철학자들, 다른 미학자들과 이걸 어떻게 비교할지 는 좀 더 얘기를 해봐야 될 것 같습니다. 그런데 언어로 전달 또는 언어로 번역될 수 없다는 것이 있다는 것, 그게 그 느낌과 관련이 있는데, 음악을 한번 생각해 보시면 음악에 어떤 의미가 있나? 음악에 어떤 음악을 언어로 번역할 수 있나? 이런 것과 오히려 더 관계가 있다고 생각을 합니다. Okay. And this from the same person, Baek Woo-in, he asked, he thinks there's some similarity between Gabriel Tart's theory of neo-monadology and Whitehead's theory of actual entities. But at the same time, it seems they are very different. Very similar. Sorry. I'm wondering if Whitehead has been influenced by Tart or has mentioned Tart in his
No.
writing.
I'm pretty sure Whitehead never heard of Tard. They just come out of, but I think what they have in common is they both read Leibniz and they both responded to Leibniz, and many of the similarities come from that. Tard is a weird figure because he was mostly forgotten until Deleuze and Latour revived interest in him.
Mm.
But when Deleuze and Latour first wrote about Tard, I think everybody in France sort of, who's this weirdo who nobody's read in 50 years, and all of a sudden these people are quoting him. So Tard is a very interesting, I've read a lot of Tard actually, but he's a very weird figure. Some of his work is wonderful and some of it just seems to be incredibly stupid. I shouldn't say that maybe, but I don't know. It's very uneven. But I think the similarities come from the fact that they're both close readers of Leibniz.
아마 화이트헤드가 타르드를 알지는 못했을 겁니다. 하지만 그 공통점을 발견하셨다면 그건 화이트헤드, 타르드 둘 다 라이프니츠를 읽었고 라이프니츠에 많은 영향을 받았기 때문일 겁니다. 타르드는 재밌는 인물인데요. 들레즈 라투르가 지난 몇십 년 동안 그를 다시 언급하면서 다시 완전히 잊혀졌다가 다시 관심을 얻게 됐습니다. 선생님도 타르드를 많이 읽어보셨는데 어떤 글은 아주 멋지지만 어떤 글은 좀 바보 같기도 하고 좀 이렇게 왔다 갔다 하는 것 같은 인상을 받았습니다. 어쨌든 라이프니츠의 영향 때문에 비슷한 것 같습니다. 야. Okay, I guess that may be the last question from, if there's none, I will read the question from Park Ki-young. According to Kant, aesthetic judgment is singular and can be asserted, but it is aesthetic judgment is non-arguable. That means, if as you interpreted Kant and spoke about it, feelings for Kant are the necessary foundation for cognition, then can you only assert when it comes to rational judgment or ethical obligations uh, and cannot dispute what is more valid and what is right? If not, why so?
Um, Okay, I'm trying to find the quote from Kant. Okay, I don't have what it is in German, but in the English translation, Kant says we can argue about aesthetic, we cannot dispute about them. And again, I have to go back and look up the German words, but people argue. I mean, in fact, people argue about aesthetic judgments all the time. I like a movie and somebody else doesn't like the movie, or they think it's great and I think it's kind of lame, and so we argue about it. We probably don't convince one another. When Kant says you can't dispute about it, it's that you cannot make a rational argument, which you force, which has to be valid. The argument remains subjective. No, it's more complicated than that. But anyway, Kant sees this as a separate realm from either science and facts, or from morality. I think in the 21st century, we probably have a more sense that these categories aren't as separate as Kant wanted them to be, that they all get kind of intermingled together. But I mean, it gets close to aesthetics when you argue with somebody who believes in some kind of political conspiracy theory, which you think is totally bizarre and makes no sense. I mean, lots of people, I don't know what to say. I mean, I don't know what's going on in the United States. You talk to people who support Trump and they'll say things like, there's a whole conspiracy which Joe Biden is trying to turn the country communist by sending people to concentration camps, and there's no truth to this, but people believe it. I mean, what do you do with people who believe totally bizarre things? I mean, I don't know what the solution is, except, I mean, I feel that I feel very strongly that they're wrong. They have a distorted view of the world that's totally factually incorrect. On the other hand, if somebody likes a movie and I'm not as enthusiastic about it, then, we can argue. I can say, I like this movie because of X, Y, and Z. On the other hand, this part really annoyed me, and I thought that character was done in a poor way. And so, we can say things like that. But that's not the same kind of argument. It's not an argument of facts. And again, morality, most ethical and moral argument today is not as black and white, let's say, as for Kant. But again, these different types of arguments are about different types of subjects, and there are different ways in which you try to enforce what you say. And you can't ever force anybody to agree with you, unless you have a totalitarian state and you send them to jail for disagreeing. But there are different ways and reasons why certain things make sense in certain realms and more than in other realms. I mean, I'm not sure what I can say. Again, it was much more cut and dried for Kant because he really felt he had these categories which had absolute limits and each one was separate. And I think a more contemporary 21st century view to see them as, more and more mixed up with them. I mean, some people are very skeptical about physical and biological science. I'm not, but I understand why some people are worried about sort of prejudices and judgments getting mixed in with trying to figure out what's really factually the case. So, if that makes sense.
Okay. 칸트의 그 독일어 번역을 지금 찾을 수는 없지만 영어 번역으로는 아규는 할 수 있지만 디스퓨트는 할 수 없다. 그러니까 얘기하고 논쟁은 할 수 있지만 그걸 그 반증할 수는 없다라고. 그러니까 합리적인 논증으로는 할 수는 없다. 왜냐하면 그것은 주관적이기 때문이다라고 했는데 20세기에는, 그러니까 20세기 이후에는 칸트가 이걸 그 그러니까 인식과 미적 경험을 나눈 것과 달리 세 가지가 막 그러니까 인식, 도덕, 미적 경험이 연결이 돼 버린 것 같다. 정치적 음모론의 경우에는 그 조 바이든이 어떤 뭐 수용소를 만들고 있다느니 뭐 이런 것을 사람들이 막 믿기도 하는데 이게 그 인식이 마치 그 미적 취향처럼 그들이 어떻게 그걸 믿을 수 있지라고 생각이 들지만 오히려 그 칸트가 나눴던 것과 달리 그렇게 좀 더 엄밀하게 나누지 못하는 그런 면이 강해졌다. 그러니까 어, 누군가 내가 그러니까 안 좋아하는 영화를 아주 좋아할 때, 그 영화 별로였는데라고 몇 가지 포인트를 말할 수 있지만 이건 엄밀한 의미에서 논증과는 좀 다르다. 그래서 사람들이 그 편견이나 이런 것들이 지식과 결합되는 것 또는 혼동되는 것에 그 걱정하는 것을 이해할 수 있다. 이런 답을 해주셨습니다. And actually, there was one more question. If if you have time for another
Yeah,
question.
sure.
Okay, how does the tension between Whitehead's view that reality is a verb rather than a noun and Graham Harmon's idea that objects are nouns rather than verbs play out in in your view on speculative realism? Did you understand? So
Yes, yes, yes.
yeah.
No, that's a that's a great question also. Well, ultimately I'm more on Whitehead's side than on Harmon's, but I really like Harmon a lot. And what I'd say is Harmon makes very strong arguments, which I mostly accept, which he says that an object or a thing is not reducible to the other perspectives on the object. So, I look at the moon and I see the moon in a certain way. And I can't see the other side of the moon unless we send a spacecraft to look at the other side of the moon. Even then, several nations have landed on the moon and they do tests and look at, so they know what the moon's made of. But none of that, Harmon is quite right that none of that adds up to total grasping of the moon. There is always something in the moon which will escape our attempts to grasp it and lay hold of it and so on. Where I don't agree with Harmon is that I don't think that fugitive or missing the impossibility of our ever getting a totalizing grasp of the moon. He says the moon is a thing in itself and its own integrity apart from all these attempts to grab it. I'm not sure that I don't. That's what I don't accept. I don't think calling it a thing or an object is quite the right way to talk about what of the moon is inaccessible to all our attempts to grab onto the moon and understand the moon and everything about the moon. So it's a subtle thing, but so for me, Harmon himself talks about how we have all these interactions, there are relations. He has a very weird and sometimes interesting theory about relations. And he says these things are reducible to their relations. And I think he's right, except what he's wrong from my point of view is to go from they're irreducible to these relations to it's something in and of itself, which this isn't the right concept, I don't think, for me.
Mm.
I hope that makes sense. That's how I think.
Yeah.
I like so and
그러니까 나는 화이트헤드 쪽에 훨씬 가깝지만 하만을 아주 좋아하고 하만이 말하는 많은 것에 동의할 수 있습니다. 하만은 많은 것을 하만이 하는 논증 중에 아주 강한 논증들이 있는데 그것에 동의하기도 합니다. 예를 들어 어떤 사물을 그걸 보는다고 해서 그리고 사물을 다른 면들로 환원될 수 없다. 그러니까 달을 여기서 바라보는 것과 달을 우주선이 바라보는 것과 이런 것들을 다 합친다고 해서 달 전체를 우리가 포착할 수는 없다. 이런 생각에 동의를 합니다. 하지만 동의할 수 없는 포인트는 아주 미세한 포인트이기는 하지만 사물 그 자체가 있다라는 생각. 여긴 제가 잘 이해를 못했는데요. 그러니까 달에 대해서 so I think I should ask you again before I
Yeah.
translate incorrectly. So the point you don't agree, so you disagree with Haman, is that there are things in themselves, or that the moon itself is it beyond our cognition. Was that the point?
Moon. No, it's a difficult point. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like if I think about myself, I don't know everything about myself. Other people see me in different ways, and some of them might be right and I might be wrong. But I mean, I don't want to say there's a deep core of myself which is absolutely real, which is apart from all this stuff. I mean, I'm more than all these different things, but I'm not one thing in and of itself in this kind of completely self-contained way. And that's the part of Harman which I
okay.
and I'd say the same thing about the moon that I say about myself.
Okay, I got it. 그러니까 내 자신에 대해서 생각할 때 어떤 깊은 핵심, 깊은 중핵 같은 게 있다라고 생각을 하마는 하는 것 같은데, 근데 그렇다고 해도 그게 완전히 실제하는 그것을 그것이 있다기보다는 그 실제 뭔가 이상, 그것보다 더 이상 포착하기 힘든 어떤 그 이상, 그러니까 즉자적으로나 대자적으로나 그것이다라고 할 수 있는 것보다 다른 것이 뭔가 있지 않은가. 그러니까 다른 것이라기보다는 그것을 빠져나가는 것, 그러니까 이해할 수 없는 면이 어느 정도는 있지 않을까. 다른 관계들로 환원될 수 없는 것이 있지 않을까라고 생각을 해서 하만이 그 강하게 주장하는 그 실제론의 중요한 그 강한 주장을 동의는 하지 않으신다고 하십니다. 네. 오케이. So back to the moderator and Galmuri Publishing. Yeah.
Thank you so much
예.
for doing all.
예. 시간이 지났음에도 불구하고 선생님께서 질문에 이렇게 성심성의껏 대답을 해주셔서 대단히 감사합니다. 예. 아울러 우리 강지아 통역사님께서 아주 굉장히 큰 수고를 해주셨습니다. 감사드립니다. 그리고 당연히 그 질문을 해주신 그 선생님들, 참가자분들께서 아주 좋은 질문을 해주셨기 때문에 저희가 또 많은 것을 배울 수 있었던 시간이었던 것 같습니다. 예, 그러면 이제 오늘 행사를 마치기 전에 우리 스티븐 샤비로 선생님께서 마지막으로 하시고 싶은 말씀 있으시면 우리 큰 박수로 청해 듣고 마무리하도록 하겠습니다. 예, 자,
Okay. Thank you so much for the lecture. Thank you so much for the very kind answers, and we would like to hear your last comments for the audience and for the readers of the book. Yeah.
I would just like to say thank you to Galmori Press for translating three of my books. It's more than been translated into any other language. And thank you to everybody here for coming to hear me and listening and for your questions. And just, it makes me happy to communicate, especially to people I wouldn't otherwise meet. So I'm very happy to have been here. But thank you very much.
네, 제 책을 3권이나 번역해준 갈무리 출판사에게 아주 감사드리고 참가해주신 모든 분께 감사드리는데, 다른 모든 언어보다 한국어로 가장 많이 번역이 된 것 같습니다. 그리고 이런 기회가 아니면 만날 수 없는 분들과 만나서 얘기 나눌 수 있는 게 너무 기쁘고 아주 감사했습니다. 오케이, thank you so much, everyone.
Late here, I'm about to go to sleep. So
예.
thank you.
Yeah. Good night.
너무 감사합니다.
Good night. And yes, it's my night.
마지막으로
수고하셨습니다.
예, 오늘 강연해주신 샤비로 선생님과 또 참석해주신 모든 분들께 감사드리고, 무엇보다 갈무리 출판사에게 감사드리겠습니다. 그리고 마지막 한마디 더 붙이면은, 오늘 이제 강의가 유익하셨다면 기준 없이 책을 꼭 아직 안 구입하신 분들 구입해 주시고, 또 그 밖에 갈무리 출판사에 좋은 책들이 많으니까 많은 관심과 응원을 부탁드리겠습니다. 예, 안녕히 돌아가십시오. 감사합니다.